"Ma'am, you're overreacting," the nurse said sharply, her arms crossed as she looked down at Mrs. Johnson, clutching her chest. "It's probably just anxiety. You black people are always so dramatic." The words cut deeper than the pain ripping through Mrs. Johnson's chest. She struggled to breathe, sweat beading on her forehead, yet the nurse's tone carried no urgency, only irritation. Around them, the ER buzzed with movement, but no one seemed to notice that a woman was slipping closer to death right there in the waiting room. Mrs. Johnson tried again, her voice weak but desperate. "Please, I have a family history of heart disease. Something is wrong. This isn't anxiety." The nurse rolled her eyes. "Calm down. You'll be seen when it's your turn. Stop making a scene." In that moment, Mrs. Johnson realized she wasn't just fighting for her life against the crushing pain in her chest. She was also fighting to be believed. Welcome to Black Community Stories. Make sure you like and subscribe for your top-notch stories. Mrs. Johnson was only 42, but that night she felt much older. Her chest felt heavy, like bricks pressing down. The air outside had been thick with New Orleans humidity, but this was different. It wasn't the weather. It was something inside her, clawing, squeezing, refusing to let go. She drove herself to the ER because she couldn't risk waiting. She knew her family's history. She knew what heart trouble felt like. As she stepped into the brightly lit hospital lobby, the air smelled of bleach and cold metal. Patients sat hunched in plastic chairs. A child cried in a corner, and a television mounted high on the wall mumbled about the evening news. Mrs. Johnson held her chest with one hand and her purse with the other, moving slowly toward the check-in counter. "Ma'am, I'm having really bad chest pain," she said, her voice trembling. "It runs in my family. My mom died at 46. Heart attack. Please, I think something's wrong." The triage nurse behind the counter barely lifted her eyes. She clicked her pen, glanced at the intake form, and then looked at Mrs. Johnson in a way that made her feel small, as if she were already a problem. "You look nervous," the nurse said flatly. "Are you sure this isn't just anxiety? Stress can make your chest feel tight. Maybe you need to calm down a little." Mrs. Johnson blinked in disbelief. The pain wasn't something she could calm down. It was sharp, crushing. Her heart raced in her chest. "No, this isn't anxiety. I know my body," she said firmly. But her voice shook. "Something's wrong." The nurse sighed, as though she had heard this too many times before. Then with a tone coated in judgment, she added, "You people are always quick to assume the worst. Sit down. You'll be fine." The words cut deeper than the pain. Mrs. Johnson's throat tightened. She wanted to scream, to demand care. But she also knew the power the nurse held. Instead, she walked slowly to the row of chairs, lowering herself into one while holding her chest, sweat sliding down the side of her face. Time dragged on. Every minute felt like an hour. She pressed her palms together and whispered small prayers under her breath, trying to hold herself steady. Her breaths came short, broken, but when she looked toward the nurse's desk, she saw laughter. The nurse was chatting with another staff member, shaking her head as if Mrs. Johnson were just another dramatic patient. Mrs. Johnson clenched her fists. The pain shot through her left arm now, burning and heavy. She remembered her mother's final words before collapsing years ago. "It feels like an elephant on my chest." That same weight was crushing her now. She forced herself up and staggered back toward the counter. "Please," she whispered. "It's worse now. I can't. The nurse rolled her eyes. Sit down before you scare people. Don't act out. You're fine. And then she turned her back. Mrs. Johnson's vision blurred. She stumbled back to the chair, clutching her chest with both hands, tears mixing with sweat. The buzzing lights above hummed as though mocking her. She tried to slow her breathing, but the sharp pain didn't let go. The waiting room clock ticked louder in her ears. Her pulse felt uneven, skipping beats. She glanced around at the other patients. Some looked away, uncomfortable. Others whispered quietly. No one moved to help. Her body trembled. She thought of her children at home, her daughter's laughter, her son's wide-eyed questions at bedtime. She couldn't leave them, not like this, not in a cold waiting room where nobody seemed to care. But as her chest tightened further, darkness began to creep in at the edges of her vision. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, struggling to hold on. Before we dive in deeply, let us know in the comments what country or which city you're watching this story from. We'd love to know how far this story travels. Mrs. Johnson sat slumped in the hard plastic chair, trying to hold herself steady as the minutes crawled on. The pain pulsed through her chest like a hammer striking again and again, leaving her gasping. Each time she shifted to ease the pressure, it grew worse, spreading down her arm, up her jaw. Her hands shook as she reached into her purse for her phone. The screen blurred from her sweat-slick fingers, but she managed to unlock it. She thought about calling her sister, but her pride stopped her. She didn't want to sound weak, didn't want to scare her children at home if her sister rushed over. Just hold on, she told herself. They'll call me soon. But no one called her name. The nurse's laughter echoed from the counter. Mrs. Johnson's ears rang with every chuckle. She could almost hear the mocking tone again. You people are always quick to assume the worst. Her chest clenched tighter. She gritted her teeth and pushed herself upright again, forcing her legs to carry her back to the counter. Her knees wobbled, her body weak, but she pressed on. Please, she said, her voice a whisper this time. It's getting worse. I can't breathe right. Please help me. The nurse turned, annoyance plain on her face. Ma'am, you need to stop exaggerating. You've already been checked. There are people with real emergencies here. Sit down and wait your turn. Real emergencies. The words tasted bitter in Mrs. Johnson's mouth. She was barely holding herself up, her breath shallow, her body screaming. Yet to this nurse her pain didn't count. Before she could respond, the nurse leaned in closer, lowering her voice to a cold whisper. I know your type. Drama, drama, drama. You're not fooling anyone. Then she straightened up and turned away as if Mrs. Johnson wasn't even standing there. Mrs. Johnson's knees buckled. She stumbled back to the waiting area, collapsing into the chair with a thud. A few patients looked over, concern flashing across their faces. But none spoke. Maybe they were afraid to get involved. Maybe they believed the nurse. Her breathing grew jagged. She closed her eyes and thought about her daughter's school dance coming up, about the dress they had picked out together. She thought about her son's science project that still sat half-finished on the table. Her children needed her. She couldn't leave them, not like this. But her body was failing. The waiting room blurred into shapes and shadows. Sounds grew distant, muffled, like they were coming from underwater. Her hand slipped from her chest and hung limp at her side. A sharp voice cut through the fog. Hey, ma'am, are you okay? It was a young man, maybe in his 20s, sitting 2 chairs away. His face was pale with alarm as he leaned closer. Mrs. Johnson tried to answer, but no words came out. Her chest convulsed, and a cough rattled her throat. The young man jumped up. "Somebody! She's not okay!" His voice rose, urgent. Finally, heads turned. The room buzzed with nervous whispers. The nurse walked over, slow and irritated, like she was being dragged into unnecessary drama. "She's fine," the nurse said sharply. "She's just worked up." The young man's jaw tightened. "No, she's not fine. Look at her." Mrs. Johnson's body slumped forward, her arms trembling, her skin clammy. The young man reached out, steadying her before she fell from the chair. "She can't breathe," he shouted. The nurse rolled her eyes. "I'll get her vitals again, but I'm telling you, this is anxiety." But when she finally pressed the monitor against Mrs. Johnson's arm, her expression faltered. The numbers blinked red, blood pressure dropping, pulse irregular. The nurse froze for a moment, then muttered, "I'll call someone," but her voice was low, hesitant. The young man snapped, "Call someone now! She's crashing!" The room erupted with movement. A second nurse appeared, followed by an orderly pushing a gurney. The sound of hurried footsteps filled the air. A doctor in a white coat came rushing over, his eyes narrowing as he took in the sight of Mrs. Johnson's pale, sweat-drenched face. "What's going on here?" the doctor barked. The young man pointed at Mrs. Johnson. "She's been begging for help for hours. No one listened. Now look at her." The doctor pressed his fingers to her neck, feeling the faint, irregular pulse. His eyes widened. "This is a cardiac event. Get her to the back right now." The orderly and second nurse moved quickly, lifting Mrs. Johnson onto the gurney. Her body felt weightless, limp. Her eyes fluttered, catching brief flashes of ceiling lights passing above her as they wheeled her away. The young man stood frozen, shaking his head at the triage nurse. "You almost let her die." The nurse swallowed hard but said nothing, her face pale now, her arrogance cracked. And in the chaos of the ER hallway, Mrs. Johnson's world narrowed to the sound of the heart monitor beeping faintly beside her as they rushed her toward the treatment room. The fluorescent lights streaked above her as the gurney rattled down the hallway. Each bump sent fire through Mrs. Johnson's chest. Her vision flickered, bright one moment, dark the next. She heard voices around her, quick and urgent, overlapping in a storm she could barely follow. "BP is crashing! Get oxygen on her! Move! Move! She's tachycardic, irregular rhythm. Get a line in now!" Hands pressed against her arms, pricking her skin with needles. A mask descended over her mouth and nose. Cool oxygen filled her lungs, but it wasn't enough. Her chest squeezed tighter, as if invisible hands were crushing her from inside. Her head turned slightly, catching a glimpse of the doctor's face. He was young, mid-30s maybe, his eyes sharp with focus. "Stay with me," he said firmly. "You're not going anywhere tonight. We've got you." But Mrs. Johnson couldn't respond. Her lips moved, but no sound came. The ER room was chaos. Beeping monitors, the metallic clang of instruments being pulled from drawers, nurses rushing around in practiced motion. Yet through the noise, her ears caught fragments. How long has she been here? Over 2 hours, maybe 3. 3 hours? With these symptoms? Who triaged her? The silence that followed was louder than any alarm. No one answered. The doctor cursed under his breath. She should have been seen the minute she walked in. We've lost time we don't have. Mrs. Johnson's eyelids fluttered. Memories came in flashes, her daughter twirling in the living room, her son's laughter when he beat her at a board game, the warm smell of gumbo simmering on the stove. She clung to them, fragile and distant, as her body betrayed her. The doctor's voice cut through again. "She's having a myocardial infarction. Prep for cath lab, now." Nurses scrambled, pushing carts, snapping gloves, adjusting IVs. The sound of heart monitor alarms grew sharper, faster. The rhythm on the screen spiked and dipped wildly, like a storm in her chest. "Stay with me, ma'am," a nurse urged, squeezing her hand. But Mrs. Johnson barely felt it. Her fingers were numb, her skin clammy. The room spun, then suddenly everything went quiet. Her vision tunneled into darkness. A long, piercing alarm filled the room. The monitor flatlined. "Code blue," the doctor shouted. "Get the crash cart." The team moved in a blur. Pads slapped against her chest, gel smeared quickly. "Charging to 200. Clear." Her body jerked violently as electricity surged through her heart. The monitor spiked, then dropped flat again. "Charging to 300. Clear." Another shock. Her body lifted off the bed, then fell back with a dull thud. The beeping monitor flickered. A weak rhythm returned, stuttering but alive. "She's back," a nurse said breathlessly. The doctor exhaled, but his jaw was tight. "We don't have much time. Prep her for the cath lab now, or we'll lose her again." The gurney jolted forward once more, pushed quickly down another corridor. The walls seemed to blur into streaks of white and gray. Mrs. Johnson's head rolled to the side, her eyes half open, catching glimpses of passing faces, some worried, some simply staring. She wanted to speak, to demand answers, to scream at the nurse who dismissed her. But her body was too weak, her voice trapped. The hallway opened into another room, colder, brighter. Machines surrounded her, their screens glowing with unreadable numbers. A masked cardiologist stepped forward, pulling on gloves. "We're going in," he said. "Time is muscle. We've already lost too much." Hands moved fast. Wires, needles, monitors, all connected to her fragile frame. A nurse leaned close to her ear. "You're strong. Just hold on." The pressure in her chest throbbed like a relentless drum. She drifted in and out of consciousness, fragments of voices slipping in. Should have been caught sooner. We could have prevented this. Who let her sit for hours? The words felt like knives. Even as her life hung by a thread, she could hear the truth. They hadn't believed her. Her thoughts blurred, slipping between fear and anger. She thought of her children again, their faces shining in her memory. She couldn't leave them behind, not without a fight. The cardiologist's voice rang out one last time before the anesthesia swept her under. "Let's save her before it's too late." And then, blackness. When Mrs. Johnson opened her eyes, the room was dim and hushed. A faint beep pulsed beside her, steady but fragile, like a reminder that she was still here, barely. Tubes trailed from her arms, oxygen prongs rested in her nose, and the sterile smell of disinfectant filled her senses. For a moment she didn't know where she was. Then it all came back. The pain, the waiting room, the nurse's cold words. Her body felt like it had been run over, weak and sore, but her mind burned with anger and confusion. The door creaked open, and a nurse in blue scrubs stepped in quietly, holding a clipboard. Not the same nurse. This one's face was softer, eyes filled with concern. "Mrs. Johnson, you're awake," she said gently. "You're in the cardiac unit. You had a heart attack." The words landed heavy, even though Mrs. Johnson already knew them deep down. She turned her head slowly, her voice hoarse. "How long was I out?" "Hours," the nurse said. "The doctors managed to stabilize you after the procedure. You're lucky to be alive." Lucky? The word stung. Was it luck, or pure survival against neglect? The nurse adjusted the monitor and hesitated. "Your family's been trying to reach you. Do you want me to bring them in?" Mrs. Johnson nodded weakly. Moments later, the door swung open again, and her sister rushed in, eyes red from crying. Behind her, her teenage daughter and young son peered in anxiously. Her daughter clutched a crumpled drawing in her hand. Her son's small face was tight with worry. "Mommy," he whispered, climbing onto the chair beside her bed. Tears welled in Mrs. Johnson's eyes. She pulled her children close with trembling arms. For a few minutes the room was filled with nothing but the quiet sound of their breathing together, holding on. But peace didn't last long. A firm knock at the door broke the moment. A doctor stepped in, the same one who had rushed her into treatment. His expression was calm, but shadowed with guilt. He cleared his throat. "Mrs. Johnson," he began carefully, "I need to explain what happened tonight." Her sister turned sharply. "Explain? You mean why she was sitting in that waiting room for hours while she was dying?" The doctor's face tightened. He didn't deny it. Instead, he nodded. "She should have been seen immediately. Chest pain with her history is an emergency. The delay put her life at great risk. For that, I'm deeply sorry." Mrs. Johnson stared at him, her anger burning through the fog of her exhaustion. "I begged," she rasped. "I told her. My mother died of this. She didn't believe me." The doctor's eyes flicked downward. "I've already filed a report. The hospital administration will review what happened. There will be accountability." Her sister's voice rose. "Accountability? My sister nearly died. Do you even understand what that nurse said to her? She treated her like she didn't matter." The doctor glanced at the children and lowered his voice. "I can't speak for her words, but I will make sure this isn't ignored." After he left, silence hung in the room. Mrs. Johnson's daughter finally broke it, her voice trembling. "Mommy, why didn't they help you?" Mrs. Johnson's chest tightened again, not from the heart attack this time, but from the weight of the question. How could she explain bias, prejudice, and indifference to a child? She pressed her lips to her daughter's forehead instead, letting the silence be her answer. Meanwhile, outside her room, the hospital was already buzzing. Word had spread quickly among staff. A black woman had nearly died after being dismissed in triage. Some nurses whispered with shame, others with defensiveness. A few avoided eye contact altogether. The triage nurse herself sat in a small office, pale and tight-lipped. Her supervisor's voice was sharp as glass. "She told you she had severe chest pain, a family history of heart disease, and you sent her back to the waiting room?" "She was exaggerating," the nurse muttered. "They do that all the time." "Stop right there," the supervisor snapped. "Do you even hear yourself? This isn't the first complaint we've had about your judgment, but this time it nearly killed someone." The nurse shifted uncomfortably, her confidence cracking. In another corner of the hospital, the young man who had spoken up in the waiting room was giving a statement to an administrator. His words were blunt. "If I hadn't yelled, she'd be dead. Everyone saw it. That nurse ignored her again and again. You need to fix this, or more people are going to die." The administrator scribbled notes, his face grim. This wasn't going away quietly. Back in her hospital bed, Mrs. Johnson tried to rest, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the nurse's voice again, dismissing her pain, belittling her cries for help. The bitterness of it clung to her like smoke. Her heart might have been saved, but something deeper had been scarred. The days that followed were a blur of IV drips, vital checks, and quiet footsteps outside Mrs. Johnson's hospital room. Her body was weak, her heart damaged, but the story of what happened to her was already spreading beyond those sterile walls. It began with whispers, other patients in the waiting room telling their families what they had seen. A woman recorded part of the scene on her phone, capturing the moment Mrs. Johnson slumped forward in her chair while the nurse dismissed her. The clip made its way onto social media. Within hours, it was everywhere. Black woman ignored at New Orleans ER while having a heart attack. Nurse accused of racial bias after nearly fatal delay. The hospital name lit up in headlines, and suddenly administrators scrambled to contain the firestorm. Inside her room, Mrs. Johnson's sister read comments aloud from her phone. "Listen to this one. Same thing happened to my aunt. They didn't believe her pain until it was too late. And here, this story is my mother's story, my grandmother's story. When will it stop?" Mrs. Johnson listened quietly, her jaw tight. She didn't need the internet to tell her what she already knew. This wasn't just her fight. It was bigger, heavier, something that had been happening to women who looked like her for generations. Reporters camped outside the hospital doors. Protesters held signs that read, "Believe black women, and our pain is real." Local activists demanded change. The noise grew louder every day, echoing through the city like a drum beat. Meanwhile, the nurse who had dismissed Mrs. Johnson sat in an administrative hearing room, her face pale and stiff. Hospital lawyers questioned her as supervisors looked on. "Why did you disregard a patient with classic cardiac symptoms?" one asked. "I thought it was anxiety," the nurse muttered. "She was worked up. People exaggerate." The room fell silent. The supervisor leaned forward. "Do you realize your actions almost cost a woman her life? This is not the first time patients have complained about you, but this time the world is watching." The nurse swallowed hard. When the hearing ended, she was escorted out of the hospital, suspended, under investigation by the state board, her career, once secure, now hung by a thread. Back in the cardiac unit, Mrs. Johnson's doctor sat by her bed. His eyes were weary, guilt etched into his face. "I won't make excuses," he said quietly. "The system failed you. That nurse failed you. But you should know, you've sparked something bigger. People are speaking out." Mrs. Johnson looked at him, her voice hoarse but steady. "Speaking out doesn't give me my heart back. I'll live with this damage for the rest of my life, because someone didn't believe me." The doctor bowed his head. He had no answer. By the time she was discharged, Mrs. Johnson could barely climb the hospital steps without stopping to catch her breath. A bag of prescriptions clinked in her purse, blood thinners, beta blockers, pills she'd need every day from now on. Her children walked close to her sides, protective, watchful. They had seen their mother brought low, and the fear in their eyes lingered. In the weeks that followed, her story didn't fade. More black women stepped forward, some with heartbreakingly similar outcomes, some with stories of loved ones who didn't survive. Town halls were held, hospital boards were confronted, and for once, Administrators were forced to listen. The nurse's firing made headlines. The state board announced a full review of her license. But to Mrs. Johnson, none of it erased the night she almost didn't come home. At night, lying in her bed, she often thought back to the moment she begged at the counter, clutching her chest, her voice trembling. "Please, it's not anxiety," and how her words had been dismissed. She had lived to tell her story, but the truth was chilling. It could have ended differently. It still ends differently for too many others. The end. Please like and subscribe for more rich stories like this. Comment below. Also, if you really loved this video and want to support the channel directly, you can hit that super thanks button below.